What's going on, everybody? It's your boy Spencer here with a podcast. I don't whatever you want to call
Dude,
it.
we're spinning it back to the old days, to the Fredo days of we're gonna come here, audio only, straight from the dome. We're gonna talk about some Spider-Man.
Yeah, and I wanted to say, like, if you're watching this on YouTube, then you obviously seeing that I'm playing Spider-Man 2. I do that for a podcast specifically because I feel like it's more
That's
interesting
how
to
you
sit
know
down.
it's a podcast.
Well, you know what I mean? It's like I could even record just our faces, but I feel like it's a better viewing experience, I guess.
Like,
if you're
what, you want to watch
it's
our
entertaining
faces?
to watch the video, right? Like to help you sit down and like listen to what we're saying.
You want to watch our faces? You want to watch Spider-Man swing around New York City? Like, I mean,
And actually, watch me be absolutely terrible, dude.
yeah, exactly.
I let people drown. People are falling off buildings.
Yeah, so you're just gonna be the anti-hero Spider-Man.
The one thing I want to say about that game, because I played about 2 hours, is, man, I feel bad for that Peter Parker because the city
Dude,
is
he
in
was
constant peril. There's literally like there's balloons flying in the air. There's armed robberies and about 3 stolen cars, and in like a 30-minute increment. Dude, this guy can't rest. There's no way he has a life.
Not even for a second.
Enough about Spider-Man 2.
Spider-Man No Way Home, the cinematic event of 2021.
Yeah, I think they say like Avengers was like the big lead up, like the big finale of that. I actually feel like it was Spider-Man. I
You
feel like
think
all the
so?
events leading up to that moment
Do
led
you
up
feel
to the
like
Spider-Man
do you
movie.
feel like the book on like the kind of initial kind of batch of MCU movies is closed with that? Do you feel like we're officially kind of like in a new era of the Marvel? What is happening right now? I'm sorry. Do you feel like we're officially in a new era of like Marvel movies?
I don't know. It's kind of hard for me to say because I've really stepped away from Marvel for a long time. I didn't really watch a lot of their new shows because it's very formulaic, Marvel is, and it can get kind of tiring, at least for me. And also my appetite got really ruined because Captain America and the Winter Soldier was a horrible TV show. And it really, I'm like, I don't feel like watching Marvel again for a long time. But of course, when Spider-Man came out, I'm like, I can drop all of this. I don't really care what's going to happen.
I don't know. I think when you get to a point where they're at, it's kind of like you kind of have to have an understanding of the genre, At this point, it's like we're not trying to dress these movies up or these TV shows up as anything else. They're superhero. Like it's in the superhero genre, And I feel like in order to even enjoy these things or even interpret them the way you're supposed to by the people who make them, like you have to understand that like the superhero genre has it has its own like ceilings and limits and stuff like that. Like you can't I feel like before we would expect them to be good films, good cinematic movies, because I feel like that's what The Dark Knight gave us.
Yeah, that's true. That was
just
actually
like,
like
it
a
was
good
like
movie.
a really, really good like film, So I think we're out of that phase where we kind of place those expectations on these movies.
Yeah,
and
we can
now
have fun.
Yeah, like it's just like, yeah, it's superhero stuff. It's like I feel like it's kind of like reached a point where it's like anime, It's like you understand what you're gonna watch. Like when you watch an anime, you understand to a certain degree what you're gonna get, And I feel like we're getting that point with the superhero stuff, which is good because I feel like people can kind of care less about the tropes and kind of plot devices that people usually rely on, and just focus on like the actual story and the characters and stuff like that. And I think that was like really kind of shown in this movie for sure.
Oh, for sure. And
Let's talk about it.
Yeah, let's talk about it now. And in the beginning, let's throw away nostalgia side because obviously it's an overload. It's a sugar rush of like your favorite characters growing up, right?
Yes.
So that's inherently the movie is going to be fun to watch and entertaining because they're there. Because it's just so nice to see these old characters. Like it just makes you so happy that it's hard to think about anything else. So let's try to do that. What do you feel about the movie structure? How did you feel? Like, was the movie good, or was it just like we're so excited?
I thought it was a good movie. It's interesting. I think I have like been on record stating I really like the John Watts Spider-Man movies. Like, I really like the arc that they put Peter Parker in those films. Like, I think ever since Peter Parker has been introduced to the MCU, like he's been on a very kind of clear arc of learning what it means to actually be Spider-Man, especially like in a situation where he's getting gifted so much stuff, so many opportunities, so many different kind of, he's being molded by Iron Man. Iron Man and Spider-Man are very different characters. And so I feel like that kind of comes across really well, of just like it feels like a dissonance, but also at the same time, it also felt like Peter Parker to me. Like he's very much Peter Parker. He's Peter Parker, but simply in different circumstances. And I think that like that thing, like having that was an issue for a lot of people because it just didn't feel like a traditional Spider-Man story. But I don't know, like you can't want Spider-Man in the MCU and then want to break the rules of the MCU just to get him in there, in my opinion. So.
Yeah, he was very much a side character, and what I really loved about this movie is, you know, he was a very whimsical character, right? He was a kid, and I think he did a lot of growing up in this film.
Yeah,
and that was definitely the best part.
And I think definitely like and it plays off of like the momentum the first two Holland Spider-Man films had, in that like he's very much actively resisting that. He's very much wanting to like being Spider-Man feels like a saddle to him. Like it's a weight on him. And I think that that's a really good way to portray it, especially in you know, for today's audiences and stuff like that. Like it was a lot of responsibility that he didn't want to have to deal with, and I think that's a really relatable concept. And so when you have this movie where I think Peter Parker is under the most pressure, obviously, because the circumstances require it to. But I think when you put characters under pressure and force them to make decisions under pressure, you get to really see, you know, whether the foundations of the character hold up. And I think that they did a really good job with that in this movie. Like he is from the very on a. If we're gonna talk about whether or not it's a good movie, the first like sequence of like the whole. Like it feels so rushed and like urgent and paranoid and like holy fuck, like what's happening, and that comes across really, really well. Like they do a lot of like long takes, they do a lot of like really kind of like one shot like scenes where they move throughout a room, and I really liked how it like came across super frenetic. Like so for as on a movie level, I had a really fun time watching it. Like. You know, I tried to. I knew, you know, Tobey Maguire and Andrew Garfield are popping up in this movie, right? Like, so I'm trying to like temper that of just like I know they're gonna show up, and I'm just trying to see if like everything that leads up to that works, and it worked for me. It really did.
And one thing I also loved about the movie, you know, nostalgia aside, just you know, I'm trying to see like you know judge this movie on what it is, but it defined what Peter Parker was, right? There's all these different nuances and all their different characters, but at the end of the day, like the characters, the core values of that character, you could really see in every single one of them, and I love that as a you know someone who loves Spider-Man, who grew up as his favorite superhero. I'm like, that is like really one of the coolest things that you can ever do with the character is define who he is, like whether you know he looks like this, that, or this.
And I think like on a meta level, it's really kind of it felt really earned. Just because we have these other Spider-Men that I feel like we really capture the spirit of the character in the time that they existed. Because it's like, okay, we can give Andrew Garfield Spider-Man some props. He does capture, you know, the essence of Spider-Man really, really well. It's just movies were not very good. Like the plot around them I don't think was as good as they could have been. And so when you kind of pull from these other areas, and you can have this shared experience among like three very titular characters. It's a really cool. I think it came across really, really well, and I think it worked really well, and it felt earned in that way. Just because we have like, you know, anyone who's watching this movie has seen those other films and like has that context in mind. I think when they're watching those scenes, and so I think it felt like it helps make that moment feel really authentic and more meaningful for Tom. I honestly think this is the best like I love how they kind of like reversed it. It's like, oh, he gets all of the, you know, Spider-Man stuff happens in the beginning, you know? Like he gets the Iron Spider, he gets his identity revealed, he gets all of that stuff. This is all stuff that happens later on in kind of the Spider-Man mythos, you know? And it all happens in the beginning, and I think working our way back to the root of the character in this way was really, really dope for me. I think like I said, nostalgia aside, I think how they approached it on a narrative level worked really well.
So we both agree the movie's good.
Good
now,
movie.
now we can fanboy a little bit. Now we can say how much we enjoyed the
Fuck,
hell
dude.
out
Oh my
of
God.
all these old
I'm gonna
characters
tell you guys
coming
right
back.
now. Hold on, before we get into Toby and Andrew and all of that stuff, before they even showed up.
Oh, for sure.
Before they even showed up, I'm gonna plant my fucking flag in the ground right now. Doctor Strange versus Spider-Man is the best fight I think has ever been put to film for superhero movies. Like on a like. That is the most anime fight I've ever seen in a superhero
For sure,
movie.
yeah, I can definitely
in the sense of
definitely.
in a sense of setting is important, like the characters, like the motivations, foundations of the characters played a very big part in how they approached the fight, the concepts that they used, the portals and stuff like that. I popped hard for a lot of what happened in that fight, and the fact that Peter Parker, or the MCU Peter Parker, goes up against Doctor Strange. Doctor Strange boxed with Thanos, man. Like, he traded blows with Thanos. Like, gauntlet Thanos. Like, he had multiple Infinity Stones. And Peter Parker was able to outsmart him. I think that was really cool. And I thought those were, he came out and he makes a quip to Ned and he was like, yeah, dude, I totally just fought Doctor Strange and won. And I'm like, yeah, that was nuts to me, dude.
You have to give credit to Disney or Marvel, whatever you want to call it,
Sony,
for their
yeah.
casting.
Oh yeah.
Of these Marvel characters.
Yeah.
Like Benedict Cumberbatch. Like, I can't imagine
That's
anybody
Doctor
else playing
Strange,
that.
bro. That's Doctor Strange right there.
Yeah, so that was really nice.
And I do like that we're at the point in the MCU where we kind of don't have to focus on building towards these larger event team up movies. We're kind of blown past that to where it's okay, Doctor Strange is going to show up in a Spider-Man movie and people are going to have a decent enough idea of what's going on. You're just oh yeah, everyone kind of knows at this point these superheroes know each other and shit. So I think that's cool. I think it's cool we're at that point.
One more thing I want to say about the plot that I like is I don't need some sort of intergalactic weird reason why it happened. I'm very good with the idea that Doctor Strange is playing with things that he has no idea with, and there's got to be consequences to those actions. There has to be.
It's literally my favorite part of it was Andrew Garfield was there's magic here too, and I'm yeah, it's magic, bro. That's how they're here, magic.
Yeah, but I think the way they dressed it was really good though.
Yeah, I think understanding.
Dude was messing around with unknown powers.
Yeah, understanding that it's not the thing that brings them in; it's the fact that they're being brought in. The folk, nobody cares how they get brought over.
Yeah.
Everyone wants to see this happen. So nobody really truly gives a shit about how you do it. It's just as long as it doesn't seem contrived or it gets in the way of that. I think it's good, and I think that's what they did. I think they did a good job of just okay, here's how it's gonna happen. We're doing it. If you're not on board with it, you better fucking get off now.
Yeah, for sure. So before we go into Toby and Andrew, because we both have a billion things I'm sure to say about their characters because they're just amazing. Let's get into the villains, the old villains that came back.
Woo.
We have to bow down to the GOAT, Willem Dafoe, man. He brought in a hell of a performance, dude. He became the main villain of the whole storyline, and dude, it's just this guy is the Green Goblin. I don't know what to tell you.
It's it's almost like a thing where it's it didn't feel like it was kind of positioning Norman Osborn or anything like that. Obviously, he was I watched a bunch of the trailers and stuff leading up, and so it was definitely made it feel like they were kind of centering more the narrative around Doc Ock. And all of these guys have a pretty big part to play in the story, I think. But for Willem Dafoe to just show up and just slide back in like that was insane. For him to command so much attention, with his presence on screen, was just I don't know. It's not something I think I've ever really seen before. I don't think it's something we've experienced in a movie before, to where someone I don't know. It's not. He's very clearly the main antagonist.
Oh yeah, for sure.
But for it to kind of feel so organic and natural, and because this is a guy this is the same character. This is the same Norman Osborn from 02 Sam Raimi Spider-Man, right? And for him to feel so natural in a completely different universe, in a completely different world,
a different context,
dealing with a different Peter Parker, a different kind of character,
right?
And for it to feel as natural as it did, was insane.
And just a drastically different feeling movie,
because
too.
That character was crafted to be a foil to to Tobey Maguire Peter Parker.
Right.
And for the fact that Willem Dafoe is such a good actor that he can come in and understand what the dichotomy between the Green Goblin and Peter Parker is, so much so that he can like go to a completely different Peter Parker and like still crush it, is insane to me. That is just nuts.
I enjoyed it. He was one of the biggest joys of the movie. Like, he was just so like the intensity that you felt between him and the MCU Peter. It's like, dude, like I can feel this right now, which is silly to say because it's a superhero movie, but still, it's like, dude, you have to, like, anybody who listens to this has to think about it. Like, I was 5 years old when Spider-Man came out. I was 5, dude. It was the greatest movie I'd ever seen in my life at that point in time. I was so excited about it. I probably watched it 1 billion times, and to see that character again as an adult, it was
and I've just been like, I've been reading up on like how he, obviously a lot of the stuff was kept under wraps, so it's like, it's not like Willem Dafoe could have like gone out and talked about how he was preparing for this and stuff like that. But he's talking about when they approached him for the role, like he was like, I'm not doing this unless you let me do the stunts. Like, I'm not just gonna show up to do wide shots and or do close shots and shit. Like, I'm going to I want to get in there. And I think the fact that and he talks about how like doing that stuff, getting your hands dirty, getting in there, kind of lends itself to a more authentic performance. And I think that really came across, especially in the interactions he was having with Holland Peter. Like, it just felt so visceral. It felt like, and Holland has to get credit too, just for being able to go back and forth. Like, Toby's was obviously Toby Peter was obviously a really meek kind of guy, but like, Holland Spider-Man, like he's got some spice, man. Like, he will go back. He was, bro, one of my favorite scenes. He's just punching him square in the face, and he's smiling. Like, it was so good because you knew how pissed you knew how mad like Peter was. Like, you can't mess with Holland Peter Parker's crew. Like, he takes that stuff very seriously, and so he is beating the shit out of. He's trying to beat the shit out of Willem Dafoe, Green Goblin, and he's just giving him like a Joker smile. It's so good, dude. It was raw as hell. It was hard. Yeah. That was hard.
Yeah, you'll remember that scene too. And you touched on it, and they actually did power scaling pretty well in this. I know we don't like that idea, but it's like it established that the first 2 Spider-Man movies, or the first 3, whatever you call it, like those characters were strong as hell. Like Toby and William Dafoe, dude, they were tough as balls. Dude, Toby stopped the train with like his brute strength, basically. Yeah. Like, those guys are strong. Train. And they weren't trying to be like, ooh, dude, it's like William Dafoe and Toby, like, or maybe, the MCU Spider-Man's as strong. It's like, no, dude, those guys are
he did a spine, bro. He did a spine buster to Tom Holland, like, through 4 stories of an apartment building. Dude, that was nuts.
And I just like that. I don't know. For some reason, it gave me a lot of joy.
Action, I think action is important. Like, I feel like in superhero movies, I feel like action is really kind of something it's a copy paste kind of template thing. But I think when you really incorporate the action to the way characters are feeling and the way the story goes, and
they weren't afraid to be exaggerated too. I've talked about that so much, about like why I hate realism in anime.
Has to be a
and it's the same thing for these movies. Do I believe that anybody could survive a trip through 4 like stories of a building, like even that Spider-Man? No.
Do I even think that that's like possible for a guy to jump off the ground and then somehow create enough force to plow through several? Like, I don't care. But
it looked cool and it felt impactful, and that's
like, I felt it. Yeah.
Yeah, I'm like, wow, that's insane. He just threw him through 4 stories, and
it's like I think the Dark Knight put us in a place where it's like, oh, realism is like,
that's key.
I mean, yeah, and I think to a degree it's important as far as like introducing the genre to people. It's important to have.
It bridges the gap for sure.
But I think we're at a point now. Endgame is like the second highest grossing film of all time.
Right.
We can kind of just fall back on the forms of the genre and really just focus on storytelling, I think. And I think when we do that, we're gonna start to get some really, really like more stuff like this is gonna be crazy. Let's talk about Tobey Maguire.
Well, no. I do want to still spend time.
One more thing,
because it's just
this is a good movie. Yeah. This is a layered good movie.
Let's talk about the other villains they brought back, right? Let's talk about Dr. Octopus, all that good stuff. So, what was your feeling on the other side characters from all the movies that came back too?
I think everyone kind of got what they needed, like as far as just like story-wise. I feel like all of the characters what is there? There's not much to do with the Kirk Connors lizard. You know what I mean? Like,
For sure.
and I feel like
That was one where I felt like they had more plans for, and maybe like in an extended cut we'll see more of. But at the end of the day, like his character felt like it didn't even need to be there.
Yeah, like at the same time, like all of these motivations, I feel like the role they play in the story, everything is consistent. Like, I pay attention to the dialogue, and like there's a point where the lizard tells Peter, like, every time you try to change people, there's consequences. So when the shit starts to get crazy, when Goblin, blows up and all the villains start to break loose, the lizard pulls up to Peter and he's like, I told you there'd be consequences, man. And so it's like, that's good enough for me as far as like the lizard. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah, and for sure. And of all the movies too, like the Amazing Spider-Man is pretty like not forgettable, but the least important of the three franchises. And I felt like they did enough justice to the Amazing Spider-Man, but not too much where like people are like, all right, we didn't like this movie that much.
Yeah, like that's where people aren't focusing, and so I think the goal should be not to draw like undue or unneeded attention
For sure.
to that element of the story. And I think they did a good job with that with Lizard and Electro.
Yeah, same
Electro
thing,
was great. I like Jamie Foxx, and I think his kind of like, I think what I liked about this is that it still had all of these villains, but they aren't like, they're making decisions. You know what I'm saying? It's like Max Dillon like never fully agrees to being cured. Like he like
right.
And I think and again, I really like how this movie plays off of their prior appearances, because the Max Dillon character in The Amazing Spider-Man 2 was like, felt really empowered by the fact that he got the Electro superpowers. And so like the concept of him like wanting to give them up is a very interesting kind of situation to put the character in. And then he, gets to make a decision. We get to see him make a decision, which I think is really dope. I feel like the story dictates the decisions characters make a lot of the times. And I think when the story allows characters room to feel like they're organically making a decision based on, how their character's written, I think it's really dope. And I think, like I said, that's why I think like I liked their portion in this Lizard and Electro. Doc Ock obviously is like he's the GOAT. Like Alfred Molina.
Great too, man.
Alfred Molina, again, both of these guys were able to just like fall right back in to these characters.
And I think it was easier for him because the Doctor Ock, like the Spider-Man 2 is a much more serious film than Spider-Man 1.
It's darker for sure.
Yeah, so his character felt like it was very much going to fit in, but he still did a really great job with it. And especially as the movie went on, like the first appearance, and then once you have those like actual talking scenes, I think that's where he really shines,
For sure, I think.
Because the Dr. Octopus was very developed as like an individual.
What was important about Doc Ock, I think, is like, okay, we're seeing him, and how are you going to play off of the fact that like the last time we saw Doc Ock, he was being redeemed, And so how do we kind of like, you can't disservice that. You can't shit all over that, And so I think the way they got back to that, I think one was, it felt good. It didn't feel like a cop-out. And two, because it didn't feel like a cop-out, because I feel like we've done a lot of like laying the groundwork with Peter Parker's character, in that like it's curing them is something that he would do. Maybe he would be apprehensive to it like he was, but it was something that is like he would do that, because we see him fight the Vulture in Homecoming, and he's about to win or whatever, and he notices the Vulture's like backpack is about to explode, and like that could kill him. And he's like trying to help people. So he inherently, like Peter Parker and the MCU inherently wants to help people. So I think lending itself to that, I think was a really good way to incorporate Doc Ock in the story.
All right, and we have one other villain, Sandman. We talked about this a little bit before we went on the podcast, but I enjoyed that they brought him back, because it basically tells, Sony says like, we're not ashamed of Spider-Man 3. Like, we know what it was. Like, it was like not a good movie, but still, it has a special place in our hearts too. Because when I saw it, I thought it was cool, right? Because I was a kid and there was a bunch of villains. Yeah. But the great thing is that they brought back the definitive villain from that movie, being like that.
The only guy who was meant to be there from day one. Like Sam Raimi started with like Spider-Man 3 is going to be the Sandman movie.
Right. He was, and there was supposed to be none of that other stuff, and they forced him to add a bunch. And we got to see, what the true intention of that character was. Not that it didn't show up at certain parts of Spider-Man 3, but it was a surprise one to see. And I'll also say this: I had no idea. I didn't see a single trailer for this movie before I saw, so everything was literally a surprise. I had no idea the Sandman was going to be in there. So when I saw him, it was like, I'm like, oh, I don't really know how this is going to work out, but he did his part, and I thought he added a lot to it.
Again, yeah, like I think the through line for the villains was just that you're gonna play off the arcs that they had before. You can't just throw them in the MCU and just like expect. Like, I feel like the only way to properly do it is to have the events in the movies that we saw them last inform the decisions they make today. And so, like, obviously when he sees Peter Parker, he's gonna help Peter. When he sees Spider-Man, he's gonna help Spider-Man. And I think that's a really nice kind of, like, that's why they don't initially fight. That's why he's able to kind of. And so I really, really liked everything feels connected, and I feel like it's really easy when you start pulling different characters into a story. It's really easy for it to start to feel disjointed, and like, people are there for arbitrary reasons, but everything felt really connected in this movie.
All right, now it's time to talk about the boys. The boys are back in town.
Goats.
And boy, did they. So, like I said, I knew Toby and Andrew were going to be in the movie.
It was the worst kept secret in
we all knew, but no one knew how much, right? No one knew if it was going to be a little flash, a little, like, one-liner.
Mm-hmm.
But no, they were both big parts of the movie.
They were essentially in just, like, the second half of the
their
movie,
roles as Spider-Man, which I did not expect at all. I thought when they revealed Andrew, he was going to be in the movie. And then when they're like, oh, they're basically teasing, like, here comes Toby. And I'm like, they're probably just going to wait until the end. He'll have this small, kind of,
that's
like,
kind of
last
like,
second.
I wanted to expect it like that because I didn't want to be disappointed. Like, I wanted to kind of just temper it a little bit of just being like, I probably like, and I sold myself. It's like, again, this is a movie about Tom Holland, Spider-Man. Like, I try to never, like, departing from that thought, I feel like is setting yourself up, for to be disappointed. Like, this is like Tom Holland, Peter Parker is the main character of this film,
right?
And I feel like it would do people well to understand that before they go and see it. So the fact that they were, like, legitimately, like, from the second half of the movie on, like, legitimate supporting characters was really, really cool to me. Like, I think that
it was everything that I wanted and way more.
And a lot of people are going to compare the story beats of this film to Spider-Verse because obviously it's very similar. But I think, and yeah, of course, that's going to happen. They have similar concepts. But I think it still it works really well when you have these characters who are all Spider-Man, and you can have them understand each other in that way. And that was, I think, something that they introduced in this movie that they haven't with Holland's Peter Parker before, is, like, a sense of understanding. Like, I feel like no one has really kind of got Peter Parker in the 5 movies we've seen him in the MCU. Like, and they, in the situations where he's had chances to kind of express himself. Like, I feel like no one has ever really saw eye to eye with him. And so for him to finally get a moment to where, like, he's literally searching for the words to say, and these two other Spider-Men are looking at him like, yeah, we got it, dude. We know. And I think that was a really, really cool moment for him, just because he spent so much time trying to deny himself of what he wants in the service of what he feels like he should be doing. And for him to finally kind of get a moment with people who understand how that feels, it made me feel really good for him as a character, and made me feel really good, like, watching that end sequence especially. Because I don't know, man. Something about this movie, I just, like, whatever you want to say about the quality of the film, it made me, I couldn't stop smiling the entire time.
I was so happy. Dude, the moment that Andrew and Toby, like, became part of the movie, like, I'm like, oh, this is the happiest I'll probably ever be in the rest of my life.
Yeah, I just couldn't fucking wipe the smile off my face, man.
Yeah.
Like, and at that point, it's just like, okay, I feel like when I was watching it, like, I was kind of like, I had, like, my foot hovering over the brake, of just being like, I don't know, okay, I'm studying the story beats to see if, like, everything is kind of lining up to make sense. And then I feel like once it happened, I was like, okay, let's do this. I am in for the rest of the ride, you know?
Yeah, and both of them, you know, when they came into the story, they actually ended up getting a few like developmental arcs themselves. Like they weren't just there for nostalgia reasons. Like Andrew had a moment, like Toby has these moments, and we got to like really see these characters again. They were actual like supporting.
Exactly. They got to do actual things. Like Garfield, Peter, like got to redeem himself for the moment he probably like. We never get to see his character grapple with that in any kind of meaningful way, you know, after Amazing Spider-Man 2. And so for him to see, like, you know, it's realistic to think that he would struggle with that after the fact. And that, like, you know, bad thing, the ethos or like the overall mythos of Spider-Man is that bad shit happens to Peter Parker. And
it's a tragic character.
And seeing how he reacts to it is like kind of what makes us invested and interested in him. And so for him to kind of get that moment, was fantastic. Like, in a sense that he's an actual character in this movie, not like a placeholder or like not just like a symbol for nostalgia. In the same way that like Tobey Maguire's Peter Parker gets to save Norman Osborn. That's a more like subdued element of the movie. It's not something that they kind of play on as much as Garfield saving MJ, but it is an element that I think is really, really cool. Of that, like, he is going up like Toby Peter feels responsible for Norman's death in a way, and so when he is at the die at Spider-Man's hands, you know, Holland Spidey is about to kill him, and he stops him. Like, that's a really, really cool, like, full circle moment for me. And so that's what I say. Like, these guys weren't just placeholders. They weren't just there to pop the crowd. Like, they were characters in this movie, and they really thought about how they would work into the story.
And here's the best part, at least for me, about them coming back, is they look like they enjoyed it. They looked like they had a genuinely fun, like, it wasn't a check cleared thing. It's like, well, the check cleared, I'm sure, for both of them.
Oh, yeah,
very
100%.
Well. You know, obviously,
they got paid.
To get him to come back, they had to pay him a lot of money. But the check cleared, and they're like, all right, man, I'm ready to don the suit again. And that was the fact that they, you know, enjoy it. It brings you joy, at least for me.
Yeah, and I think when you look into, again, like the more meta elements of like this movie's existence, the fact that, like, you know, Toby and they've talked about it before. Toby and Andrew Garfield have talked about it before, of just like the way they left things as, you know, their time as Spider-Man. It kind of just like, it felt like unresolved, a lot of the stuff. Like, especially Andrew Garfield, he was like, he was so hyped. He put his all into that role, and you could see it. He was acting his ass off in those movies, and for it to just not work out the way he'd hoped, like, I feel like, I don't know, it came across in this way of like them getting that second chance to finally fully, like, maybe close the book on that. I feel like they really
cherish the
especially just like, I don't know, like, I feel
especially
like
Andrew.
Yeah, and Toby, like, again, his character was so well defined, and for him to he just slips right back into it. He feel like his first like dialogue was just him being like awkwardly polite. It's just like he's coming through the portal, and he's just like, I don't know, like, and it's just like he's just awkward, and you know he's trying to be nice. And I think it's
Andrew,
just so. Really,
I think
so
Toby
good.
Understood the context of like how excited we would be, and that's kind of how I feel like he approached the role. He's like, I get it. Like, I know how excited you guys are, and it's like, you know, he plays on that a little bit.
Yeah, he is the dad of this whole situation, man. He's like he kind of approaches talking to the other Spider-Man in a mentorly kind of way, and I think that was really, really cool. I think that, like, it's a natural kind of progression of seeing that Spider-Man, the Raimi Spider-Man, like, in his older age. Like, I think that was a really cool wrinkle to add to the character.
He's also strong as hell, dude. MCU Spidey tried to come down with the goblin thing, and dude, Toby's like, put the toy down.
How about, all right, son? How about you put the glider away for me, son? Huh?
That's crazy. I just love that, dude. That was one of my favorite scenes. Just, he was legitimately not struggling, and he was about to kill it. Like, he was going down with his full force. He's like, all right, let's slow down here.
All right, do you want to talk about like the ending and where we go from here with Spider-Man? Because we're kind of like we have done a reset essentially. He is the Spider-Man, I feel like, everyone wanted him to be when Homecoming and Far From Home came out.
Like I said,
feel
he
like
did a
he's
lot of growing
officially-
up, man. Like
he's officially that Spider-Man.
he's had his defining moment now, like as a character.
And that's what I'm saying is like in hindsight, obviously hindsight is 20/20, but at the same time, I feel like I personally like you can go back and listen to the podcasts that we did on these movies. Like I always kind of felt like okay, the essence of the character is still there. You know,
He was in the middle of an Avengers movie, like
that's what I'm saying.
a
It's
Civil
like,
War movie.
It's like what? Do you want him to be the friendly neighborhood Spider-Man while Thanos is like I'm saying, you can't do like. And I feel like the way we got to that felt really, really good. And I don't know, like if he feels more authentically Spider-Man, like at this point in time, you know what I mean? He feels more like Spider-Man to me than either of the other two, honestly. Just because of how much we've been able to kind of experience with him in that role. Like we've seen pretty much the full spectrum of what can happen to Peter Parker. He's lost.
And we know him so much more as a character, you know.
That's what I'm saying. It's like
at his base.
like, and you know, we've seen him more. Like we've kind of just put him in situations where like we know he's experienced things. When we know how much those must weigh on him. And so I think at the end when he really is like, okay, we understand how big of a fucking step it is for him to take to do all of this, because we saw him be anointed the chosen one by Iron Man, and we saw him like resist his call to be a hero in Far From Home, and now like we saw that like this is what happens as a result. Resisting that, he loses, you know, the one thing he felt like he couldn't lose. You know, he loses Aunt May. And so all of that, I feel like makes it like, I feel like it makes that choice for him to kind of cross a threshold and really kind of commit to being, I am Spider-Man, like, and I am going to live with all of the, you know, repercussions of that. I think that makes that moment, I think that's the heaviest moment we've seen like depicted in that way. You know, like we saw Toby make the decision to live with the responsibility of being Spider-Man. We also saw it with Andrew, but I feel like the weight of it was most significant in No Way Home for sure.
Any final thoughts?
Man, I like that movie a lot, man. Time will tell, like as far as just like how it measures up with like Spider-Man 2, how it ages and stuff like that. Because Spider-Man 2, the themes of it are really strong. I personally think it will, because I think the themes of this movie are really strong. Oh, it's great. Zendaya, please kill me. I need like that was my other ancillary thought. I was like, Zendaya is different. She's different.
Yeah, honestly, my final thoughts is I kind of just want to go see it again.
Yeah, it's a fantastic film. There's not much more I can say. Like it's just so good.
It's fantastic. So
it made me incredibly happy. It was the happiest I've been like in the theater watching a movie since like Force Awakens.
Didn't even talk about the Daredevil showing up, dude, and that was just so sick.
I think that's legitimately the fact that happened is a topic for another video.
Yeah.
Like the fact that
it finally came. Like he's official.
Yeah, that shoe has finally dropped. Like, yeah, we'll talk about that.
I love the Daredevil. So, all right, guys, that's going to do it for today's episode. Other than that, that's going to do it for today's video, and I'll see you guys next time.
Thwip.